Hello and welcome to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each week I speak to a photographer about 3 lenses that have meant something to them on their photographic journey. It's unashamedly gear chat, but hopefully focused more on the images made with that gear than performance metrics and graphs. My guest today is Dan Milnor, a former photojournalist and current creative evangelist for Blurb books. I've enjoyed Dan's videos and writing for years. He's an extremely interesting guy with some strongly held beliefs about what constitutes good work and how you get there. He's direct, a real force of nature, and I wanted to have him along because I thought he might reject the premise of the show completely and that would make for a really interesting conversation. He absolutely didn't disappoint. This one's quite a ride. Here's my conversation with Dan Milnor. The beauty of the thing, because early on when I was doing these, I kind of entertained the notion of doing them recorded and like with video as well. And I was like, yeah, that'll be the thing. And then what I realized very quickly was just how much harder that is. And when you're talking to someone, they go, it's not recorded, it's not video though as well, right? Because they're like, otherwise, oh God, I have to change the thing. So yeah, but no, I'm glad you like this. This was a purchase. This was a last minute thing from Sweden. So it's a bit Starfleet, but I quite like it.
It's got that
nice. It's got a kind of future thing, and it's orange, which I'm all about the bright colors.
Well, if you get lost, we can find you.
Yes, I'm easy to find. That is a thing. There's people at work say that. Yeah.
Speaking of finding you, where are you?
So I'm in the Highlands of Scotland. So if you were, I don't know what your Scottish geography is like, but sort of north of Perth, kind of the middle of Scotland is kind of Perth, right? So Perthshire, and so we're about just under 2 hours north of there. Then you've got kind of Inverness above us and the coast, like Nairn and places like that, where apparently Tilda Swinton hangs out, and places like that. You know, you've got the islands and things like that. So
Miss Swinton,
I know, right? Like I've not seen these people, but yeah, we live in like very central in the middle of nowhere. We moved last year, and it's gorgeous here. It's absolutely stunning. I love it.
And as an American, I have to ask, Scotland's in South America, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, near Paris.
Yeah,
that's
that's good. No, it sounds pretty fantastic. My mother loved to travel. My father hated to travel. Oh, no. And the only place my father would go was if he could fish or go bird hunting. Mm-hmm. And he went grouse hunting in Scotland and talked about it for the remaining 30 years of his life. He absolutely loved Scotland. Was one, and Portugal were the 2 places that he liked. He didn't like anywhere else.
I can totally relate to it. Like we were spending all of our holidays up here. I was born up here and we lived on Skye when I was younger, when I was growing up. But we moved around a lot when I was a kid. And then met my wife in London. She's from Scotland as well. And so we've been gradually working our way north for about 12 years. And when the 2 boys arrived, we were like, right, well, we've got to make the move before they get too grown up, and before like they're too set into school and like, you know, that stuff. So yeah, we last summer found a place surrounded by trees.
Wow, it sounds fantastic.
Oh yeah, I'll send you some pictures afterwards. It's a beautiful place. Like if you're ever in Scotland, we've also got tons of distilleries nearby. Like the reason for doing these kind of conversations and turning it into something is really just an excuse to talk to people whose work I really like and think I might get on with, and just have, you know, like that's it's a thinly veiled excuse. Like if the price of entry is putting this on the internet and then I get to meet some cool folks, then, you know, jobs are good and right. It's that proper creative practice. So
yeah,
I'm loving it.
I mean, I'm basically in the same boat. It's fun to be able to go on the computer and say, hey, I'm going to be in Barcelona on these 2 days, and people come from all over and they're like, oh, we finally get to hang out in person, kind of thing. So I get it. I love doing these things.
You've done a really interesting thing though recently as well, because you've kind of, not to, you know, to make it a jokey thing, but you've shifted like away from like the monolithic platforms, like you're moving back to kind of your own place on the internet. Is that because you've kind of got that following now and you feel like, you know, I don't want to really be at the behest of someone else. I just want to grow my own thing. Thanks.
No, I've always known that. I've never wanted to be a part of any of these platforms. And I was a part of all the platforms. I mean, up until 2012, I think it was, I was on, you know, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest and Tumblr. And I think it was 2012, I deleted 7 networks in one day. And I was just like, this is dumb. I don't want to do this anymore. I kind of figured out what they were. I saw what they were doing to my friends. I saw what they were doing to the people around me. And I was like, this is not good. And I saw that clearly in 2012. Now it's exponentially worse. And the last one for me was YouTube. I knew I was never going to be a YouTuber. I didn't want to be a YouTuber. That was 100% driven by Blurb asking if I could do motion content, and me saying, I don't know. I've been a still guy my whole life. I've never really done motion. I would love to learn a little bit more about it. And that was just the repository for where I could put things out and like test the market. And I hit 15,000 subscribers, and I said, okay, this is interesting, but I want away from this as fast as possible. And YouTube and the rest of these, for me, these are really dark places. I think the darkness overweighs the light when it comes to these, and not everything. And I tried to explain this a few weeks ago, whereas of like, you need to fix your toilet. The toilet guy on YouTube is amazing, and he's cool, and he's not necessarily trying to become a YouTuber. He's like saying, I know we have the same toilet, and I know this is going to break on yours, and I know I can help you fix it. And you're like, great. But these communities like photography, where people are in there to build following, it is a dark place. And really what drove me away, the ultimate thing was realizing that just most of the people on there are just pretending, they're not. And I'm not even talking about the people who were with the YouTube channels who are making the content. I'm talking about the people viewing the content. They want to appear to be photographers and bookmakers, but very few are putting the time and energy in because they're wasting their time on YouTube. It's so, the thing about these networks is they are so well designed. They're beautifully designed to prey on every single weakness in our chemistry. And if you listen to the people who build the platforms, write the code and build them, they talk about initial design meetings where they're like, what's your goal? Oh, we want to exploit human vulnerability. And they're like, well, do these 3 things and you will wreck humanity. And they're like, great. How do we implement those? And it's funny because I still find that people dance around these topics. There was a book that came out years ago that was like, the programs are so good. When you hear people say, oh yeah, Instagram wrecked all these people, but it hasn't wrecked me. It's just everybody else that it's wrecked, because it's so well designed that it just mashes your DNA to the point where you think you're the one that's alone in the platform that can sort of survive this. And I tell this to people all the time, and it always gets a bizarre kind of freaky reaction. Is, to me, the single most destructive thing I've ever seen to professional photography is Instagram. And I watched Instagram destroy some of the best photographers in the world. And I said that at Society of Photographic Education a couple of weeks ago, I was like, it just destroyed so many people who used to be so good. And now they're just skittish little creatures who can't get through a conversation without grabbing their phone. And here's the thing that ultimately everybody knows this. They know it. And they're on there. They're still on there because they're, number one, they're physically addicted. And 2, a lot of times now, especially when it comes from people in positions of power who give assignments in the photography world, they don't know what else to do. The next Instagram has not come. They thought it was going to be TikTok. Everybody is universally revolted by what TikTok is. They're embarrassed to be around it and be a part of it. Everyone's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I always had my own platform, which started, I certainly do have one. You'll laugh because people will be like, oh, you're full of, whatever. This was my own platform, right? My journals. Yeah. It was all my own platform until 2002. I went to a creative event. I was living in Laguna Beach, and I found out about an invite-only creative event that was going on there. And it was really high level. It was technology people, creative industry people, advertising. There were a couple of photographers, including a guy named Greg Gorman, who's a really famous celebrity portrait photographer. And Greg and I were friends. And Greg Greg's like, dude, you going to this event? I'm like, I didn't get invited. And I lived like a quarter of a mile away. So Greg called the organizer and said, look, you should invite this guy. And so I got invited to this event. And the guy that sat next to me, I think his name was Jeffrey. Jeffrey invented Blogger. He invented that platform. So, and I didn't know what Blogger was. And this kid got up, this 15-year-old kid who was a web designer who was making like millions of dollars at the time because nobody knew how to do web design. He was 15, and his mom said he had a sign on his bedroom door that said no longer accepting new clients, and he was 15.
Wow.
And this kid said the word blog, and I was like, what is that? And I was writing in my journal, and this Jeffrey dude leaned over and goes, it's the same thing you're doing in that book, but it's online. And then I was like, wow. I went home, created a Blogger account, started blogging. That was 2002. That turned into a site called Smog Ranch, which was a tribute to Peter Beard, who lived in Africa in a place called Hog Ranch. And I was living in LA, it's super smoggy. And I thought, okay, I'll be Smog Ranch. I didn't want to use my own name. I just wanted it to be some sort of community. And then I had Smog Ranch for years. And then probably 10 years ago, I converted Smog Ranch into Shifter. And what's really cool, we were talking about earlier, is I run into people all the time that I know from the Smog Ranch era. So I meet them in person, sometimes 20 years after we've been communicating online. And Shifter to me was always my hub. I had a conversation with the CEO of Blurb's parent company a couple of days ago, and he was asking me about Shifter. And I said, look, it's mine. And there's two people behind the scenes that have been instrumental in helping me keep it going, which is Fleming in Denmark and Charlene, who's in Singapore. They're awesome, super smart, and know way more about this than me. And they saved me from myself. And I don't know how to do the changes on the site and all this stuff. So I'm working with Charlene right now. She's helping me to redesign the site a little bit to handle sort of the new focus that I'm going to put on it, adding in a newsletter membership service, which I will eventually monetize. And to me, that is the future of creativity. The reason I'm monetizing the site is not because I want to live off my site. I just have to prove a point. I just have to prove something I know is already true, which is putting your work in the hands of these traditional people and models does not work anymore. If you have to control the narrative because they just don't care. Somebody posted something, and I'm not going to use names here, but somebody posted something earlier today, and it was about someone really famous in the photo industry and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, my memories of this person are not good. My memories of this person are your organization underpays contributors dramatically. You pay late. You are unreachable. You're an elite who only basically hangs out with other elites, and you're a hero in this industry? No, you're not my hero in this industry. It's time for you folks like you to move on, and we need to reinvent this industry because otherwise it will die. And the people who understand that, who have harnessed their own power and created their own ecosystem, they'll survive. The rest of them will go away. It's just it will not support people anymore. So I love Shifter. I write every day anyway. And it's just, I was telling somebody earlier, I'm not after perfect, there's going to be typos. There's going to be grammatical errors. I don't care. It's just the gist of having that place to express some things and also help educate people. I just posted today a post about a Blurb notebook that I got from Brant Slomovich in Canada. It's beautiful. It's nothing fancy. It's a Blurb softcover notebook, no big deal. But how many people don't know Brant that now are going to know Brant and then potentially go on and find his book that he did on Israel I think it's called The Cracks and Everything. It's gorgeous. That book. And if 10 people find him and support him, then I'm like, all right, that's a worthwhile blog post.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed reading what you're writing. I think there's a lot of power and value in like that. I think the other mediums have already done it a lot as well. Like games, I work in video games is my day job, and the way that a lot of people who cover games, because it's become unsustainable already, that you can't necessarily keep a job, and publishing revenues went away, and we've worked through a couple of .com booms and busts that I used to get paid 50p a word, and then suddenly overnight it was I don't think you can commission anything. And that's before they had software that could write guides for them. At least back then they begrudgingly still needed people, whereas now they could go through another boom and bust like that and then not need us at all, and that would suck. So, it can potentially only get worse from here in a lot of ways. But things like Patreon, I'm thinking of just going directly to a contributor that you like, or the Max Fun Network on podcasts is a really good comparison as well. They seem like good people, right? Like they don't seem to have a plan to massively grow and monetize and sell out to a massive conglomerate, and then retire to Tahiti. Like they just want to make good stuff. They're just a bunch of people who like making good stuff. And hey, if you like making good stuff too, come and hang out with us. And I think that seems healthier in a lot of ways.
And I think for me, it's the same thing. I look at YouTube was a pretty eye-opening experience because what I realized was there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of prosumer and consumer photographers who didn't have the luxury of going to an art school or a photography school, who never worked in the industry, who oftentimes don't even know the industry exists. They only know the online side, YouTube's and Instagram and all that stuff. And the knowledge that I have and the knowledge that the circle of friends that I have and colleagues who are still in that field, the knowledge that we have, which is not available to a lot of these people. And so for me, it's like the goal would be, let's say I charge you $10 a month to get access to this stuff. The goal would be to create something that people say, I can't believe I'm only paying $10 to get this. And then showing people step by step how projects happen, conception of idea to the sale of the printed material at the end, every single step of the way along the way of like, this is how these things happen. And not just from me, but then culling information and interviews and data from other people who are doing this. And also just constantly pointing out people who are doing this for real and not people with no training who are really good at building an audience, but really don't have any clue how to make interesting imagery. That I realized immediately that was the bulk of what was happening on YouTube. And I get it because I always use the baseball analogy. How, as a creative, can you possibly be a 5-tool player and create something in any one of those 5 realms that is to the best of your ability if you're doing the other 4 at the same time? It's so rare that you see someone on YouTube that can make great films and great stills. It's always great films. And then the stills fall completely flat. And you're like, oh, it's a waterfall. Oh, it's star trails in Utah. It's this, they go to the same locations. They shoot the same pictures. It's the same filters afterwards. But the films are unbelievable. And you're like, oh my God, this looks like something that should be on Netflix. But if you're trying to learn how to be a still photographer, this is not really going to help you. So I think I have a ton of stuff to offer people, not to mention I'm constantly on the road meeting with and running into some of the best creatives around. I mean, just today, if I had a list of people that I've contacted just today alone, I think people would freak out. And it's funny because I ran into somebody last week, somebody who's known me for quite a while, years. And they were like, why are you at this event? And I said, oh, I'm here because I'm studying this industry. And I'm looking at who's printing what in what volume, where's their number one primary print location, where's their backup plan, why is it a backup plan? COVID changed a lot of things. So like, for example, some people used to print in, you printed in Belgium, but now you can't print in Belgium because it's too expensive. So you're printing in Turkey, which requires you to do 2 press checks instead of 1. So you're saving on the print run, but it may not be the same kind of what you're getting out of Belgium, all of these things. And this person looked at me and said, oh, I thought your job was just to make books. And I was like, no, that's just one little thing. I work with the marketing team, the product team, occasionally the UX team, the customer service team, involved in all kinds of like meetings and workshops with the executive stuff. So it's like a weird job that is all over the place, but it consequently puts me in the field in front of a ton of people that I find really interesting. And I have a sinking suspicion that the people who are going to follow my site are going to find them interesting as well.
Do you think that you've made the job an in the field job because of your background in photojournalism, because of your kind of, things you've said that really have inspired me over the years and really stuck with me is about like time and access to things. And you have to be close to things. You have to be there. You can't just sort of drop in for an afternoon, take some photos and for it to be meaningful to you, I think first and foremost as a creative person, but also meaningful to the people you met. And if there's no meaning for them, then there's likely to be nothing conveyed by the imagery. But do you think you've turned your job into that because that's who you are and you think that that's where good work lies, or do you think the job naturally was that?
Well, I was originally hired to build a database, which no one knows. Like everyone thinks I was hired to be a photographer for Blurb, and that's not the case at all. I was hired, Eileen Gittins hired me. I was on their advisory board in like 2006 or 7. And I was like, I don't think they asked me to be on the advisory board. I said, I don't think I'm really an advisory board person. And Eileen, to her credit, said, I don't think you know what an advisory board person is. You know, it's not a guy in a suit. It's you using the platform and telling us, like giving us feedback. And I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So I was hired to build a database of key customers that Blurb should go with Engage. That's photographers, bookmakers, because I had done that job for Kodak in the past. And Kodak Professional in LA from 97 to 2000, I did that very thing. So that lasted a couple of weeks, and Blurb came to me and said, hey, we're doing this thing at Photo Plus Expo in New York, which at the time was a huge trade show. Back in that era, every major like New York photographer went to Photo Plus Expo. Now it's like a widget, widget show. It's all, the pros don't go. I don't even know if it's still on. But they said, hey, can you go to New York and give a talk about how you use Blurb? Have you done any public speaking? And I said, look, I'm an introvert, but I have this like fake version of myself that's an extrovert that can go and do these kind of things. So I went and gave a talk, and that was it. It was literally right turn. You are now Blurb's, evangelist, even though at the time we didn't call it an evangelist. So, it was being in the field was really key. In fact, right before you called, I was working on a document about field events for Blurb and why these are so important for us as a company. They're expensive, they're time consuming, they're tricky. Anytime you're interfacing with the public, post-COVID, everything is expensive. It's hard. I don't think we're ever going to be able to pull off like some of the things that we did in the past. But, I love being in the field. There's no better gauge of humanity, what your company is, what it means. Last November, we went to Paris Photo. That was the first big Blurb event in several years. And it was very fun for me. We took 4 other team members, 3 from the US, 1 from London, and 1 from Eindhoven. And the person from Eindhoven had done field events before. The person in London had not attended field events, but had done, been around the company for a long time, knew what was going on. And the folks from the US were new. And so, my wife was there, and she asked at the end of the first day, she said, is this what you expected or more? And they just went, oh, it's so much more than what we thought this would be. And then we had a photo walk and a meetup in Paris. And at the meetup, it's revealed that a company like Blurb or whoever is printing something, it's not ink on paper. It means a lot more than that. This is like somebody's ability to tell something that they need to tell. And it's very apparent very quickly that this is way more than a book. It's like they're so emotionally attached to it. And you can't really understand that until you're sitting face to face with a bunch of strangers who are saying, I need you to look at this. I need you to go through this page by page with me. And again, this is not, hey, look how great a photographer I am. This is like, this is my story, and I need you to know what this is. And the team was blown away. They were like, holy cow, we had no idea like that. So anytime I get a chance to talk to any of the higher ups in the company, I'm like, come with me in the field. Come out here.
Come and see it for real. Is that where you met Julian Pasternak?
Oh yeah. Julian was, well, we'd met online, and I didn't really know him. And Julian saved us. There's no, Julian saved the meetup portion of this. I'll spare you all the details. We had something kind of go sideways in the middle of the photo walk, and the rest of the team had to go address it.
Right.
And so I took the remaining folks who were in the photo walk, and we went to this restaurant, and I walked in and I said something in English, and the hostess was like, you just see her head like, oh no. You're an American. She's like, oh, we don't have your reservation. And I'm like, here it is. And she's like, no, we don't have a reservation.
Wow.
And Julian was like, oh yeah, you're behind, you're cursed for the rest of the evening. And so he helped us like renegotiate and got us set up. And he's just has such a cool personality, and he's so positive and fun and happy, and he's a really good photographer.
Yeah, no, I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and I was planning originally to only do 10 of these, and he made me promise to do at least 20 and
Yeah.
said he will check. And so
Oh,
I sort of, it was good.
yeah, he will, and he does interviews as well, and yeah, he's just a fun, smart guy that like really saved our hide at that event. So I owe him.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
no,
owe
he's a
him.
good dude. He is a good dude. I'm really enjoying staying in touch with him. It's nice, and he's maybe I'll probably see him if I'm in Paris this year, which I hope to be. I'll hopefully bump into him, and he can critique my work in a gentle but firm but positive way, which he does. So life in the field.
Yeah.
You wrote a blog post yesterday about kind of how you kind of came to photography, which was kind of like when I was doing some of my background and prep and stuff was like the perfect way in. I don't know whether you were aware that you were going to publish like the perfect preparation for a conversation like this, but it was great. And so thinking back, like that Nikon that you had, and you listed out your kind of your three lenses were sort of three focal lengths. And it's interesting to me because 35, 50, and to some extent 40 are kind of the ones that I've used most in my own photography. Now I'm unburdened with this being my job, right? So I'm at play when I'm doing this, and
Sure.
I adore and love photography, and it's great. And that's why talking to people who've done it for a living is so cool, because I can hopefully give them a bit of that fun back and talk about it. So to start with like 35,
Yeah.
is there one for you? Because you spent a lot of time with the Leica system, with the M system as well over the years.
Yeah.
Is there one that speaks to you? Because my 35 listeners will be aware of is the Zeiss 35-28, because it just oozes character. It's got a lovely kind of like contrast to it. It's like my favorite photos I've ever made that mean a lot to me, of like my kids and things like that, but were made with that lens as well. And I think 35 mil is kind of sometimes what we think of a photo. If like your first camera has that on. So is there one for you, or does it not matter? Is it just 35 is like a frame for you?
Well, there may be an interesting wrinkle here that you haven't thought about when it comes to this stuff. So when I started at San Antonio College, right, I wrote about that in the blog post where I was supposed to go to another school. I was going to study geology. They lost my transcripts. The dean of admissions called my mom, said, "We have no record of him. He has to go somewhere else for a semester, then transfer in. We'll get the transcripts again. You have to go through the whole process again." And I was like, "Oh, this sucks." And San Antonio College, in my mind, was where you went if you had like flunked out of high school. I just didn't know anything about it. It was a 2-year community school. I'm like, I'm a loser. I'm going to this school. Long story short, I back into meeting this guy, Jerry Townsend. Jerry was a journalist. He ran the journalism program and the newspaper, which was called The Ranger. I had no idea, never heard of it, never seen it. I had no idea what I was walking into. And what I was walking into was an elite college journalism program that in some ways was a lot more advanced than where I eventually got my degree, which was the University of Texas in Austin. You know, you would think, oh, UT Austin compared to San Antonio College. San Antonio College was light years ahead of UT Austin. And I should have probably just stayed there. And anyway, it wasn't, I had no idea what I was doing. Zero. I didn't know exposure. I didn't know anything. And Jerry was like, go buy this, this, and this. And I think he told me it was an FM2. And then I think he said to buy a 24 and a 35. So I think I bought like a Nikon F2. You know, that's, you know, not super expensive. It's kind of, you know, rinky dink at the time. It wasn't anything fancy. But you have to remember that is the extent of the thought put towards these lenses and this equipment, because you are driven by fear. You are driven by fear and intimidation from the faculty of the journalism program saying, do not screw this up. You're on assignment. There is no not coming back with an image. So from that point, that was probably 1988 to 1990, let's say 95, where I was still shooting Nikon. I had a 24, I had a 35, I had a 180-2.8. I was driven by fear. There was no, does this lens have a mood or a certain look or anything like that? None. You're on assignment. And I'm on an assignment for a paper that has like 1 million circulation. And there's no like, oh, you're the intern. That made it worse. You know, it's like I would get these 911 pages saying, we need a feature picture in 10 minutes or your internship is over. Don't come back to the paper. So you're not thinking about your equipment at all. You're just panic mode of like, I got to make a picture, and do I need this angle of view or this angle of view? And that's it. And by the way, if you're wrong and you choose the wrong angle of view, there's somebody at the paper reminding you that you made a bad choice. Like, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. It wasn't until 97 when I quit working as a photographer the first time and I started working for Kodak that I had the luxury of saying, how do I feel about this equipment? And by this time I had switched to Canon, and I'd switched to the 2.8 zooms because, Canon came in the late 80s, early 90s, and Nikon and the rest of Sony wasn't around really at the time. And it was really just Nikon and Canon, and Nikon did not see the autofocus and the zooms coming. And so, 2.8 Canon zooms and the EOS 1 came in and just kicked ass. And they went from like 20% market share to 80% market share. And it got me as well. And that was when I was like, okay, I know I need these zooms to do journalism. They work well. Sometimes you can't move yourself. But it wasn't until I quit where I was like, I think I'm a Leica guy. And I have a 35 f2 and I have a 50 f2, which is my all-time favorite lens, is a Leica 50 f2. If I could only have like one lens, that I probably made more good work with that than anything else, but I also used it longer than anything else. And now I have, a different kind of thing. But the 35 Leica to me was not, again, I knew there was a difference between the original 35 f2 Leica and then the aspheric 35 f2. And I originally got the regular 35 f2 in a trade, and I used it. And then I had an opportunity to get a 35 f2 aspheric in some sort of like killer deal. And I like swapped those. And that's what I shot. But again, I was so freaked out and focused on subject matter that I looked at my lenses like, what's not going to break, what's small enough to carry, what's sharp, and I don't want to think about this anymore. Like, I'm so possessed by trying to make long-term projects, tell stories, make books, tell stories, make books. That is it. And I think it's really a luxury to have the time to even realize there's such a difference between a Nikon 35, a Canon 35, a Sony 35, and then say, oh, well, this one suits my palette a little bit more. And remember, I was shooting black and white during this entire time. So there was less, like, Nikon. Everyone joked about like Nikon's color palette versus Canon's color palette. And some people loved one or the other. And the next person would say, I hate the Nikon palette, I love Canon. And the next person would tell you the opposite. So, and I still hear it today because like Sony has a look, Nikon has a look, Canon has a look. I don't shoot Leica digital, so I don't really know what their look is. I know they're fantastic cameras. And I'm shooting Fuji and Nikon now, and they both have, I think of all the stuff I've seen, the Nikon and the Fuji color is just astoundingly good. Then, and again, slightly different variants here, but they're both just really good. I mean, I would, and I wrote that in the post. The limitations of this stuff are the user. It's not the equipment.
Oh yeah, and I think you're absolutely right on that. It's a funny thing because I work with a guy who shoots a lot of Nikon stuff. We've just opened a new building, the company I work for, and we got him in to take photos of it before everyone ruins it and lives in it, and it becomes a lived-in place. It's a creative studio, so it's going to get wrecked in 5 minutes, and it will be better for it. But right now, it looks perfect, and there's amazing lines and colors and textures. And he shoots a Z9 because he does model work mostly. But there's definitely an opinionated look to the way the image renders and the way it appears and the way it looks versus something like a Fuji or a Leica. I mean, I shoot with an M personally, and I really love the colors, but even between the M10 and the M11, I could see a difference. Like they're tweaking and touching and subtly, I think probably on balance for the better in the 11 overall. But I don't feel like I love it as much somehow. Like it's better. It's weird. It's better in every way.
Yeah.
And I don't quite love it as much as the 10. And I think it's because the base plate's not there and the whatever. I don't know. There was something about, I think 10 was my first M as well. But it's that thing of, it's better in every way, but, and you're right, the limitations now, you get away with murder. Shoot raw, underexpose, overexpose, don't, 60 megapixels, don't have a longer lens, doesn't matter. Like you'll just crop in and no one will know any difference. unless you're putting it on the side of a sports stadium, you wouldn't be able to tell.
I did a shoot a couple of days ago, and to me, the limitations, like as I said before, the limitations are on you and I. Like, how talented are we? How do we see light and timing and composition? How do we gain access? How much time do we have? It's never the kit anymore. I mean, I think, you know, a good photographer, they could give you an FM2 today and you're going to go out and hammer stuff with it. It doesn't really matter. It's all about time access and like how you see the world. But I was on a shoot, you know, like a couple of days, my nephew was in town last week and he was on spring break, and I felt bad because my week went from relatively open to just an absolutely packed, a Blurb packed week of like all kinds of things, from like film production to workshops with management, all just kind of stuff. And I was like, man, I feel so bad. So at the end of the week, I was like, all right, I forget what I had something, and I was like hard out. I kind of squirreled my way out of some meetings that I was supposed to be in. Then I was like, I can't do this. And we hopped in the van and we spent like 2.5 days in the field, camping in the van and traveling around.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up at this place called Bosque del Apache, which is in southern New Mexico. It's a huge bird migration point. And he's not really into birding. This was my thing. And I was like, I'll subject him to it and see if he like something rubs off.
Yeah.
And I'm standing, it's middle of the day, lights crap. I'm standing in the middle of this giant preserve. The wind's blowing 45 miles an hour. It's dusty. I'm like, this sucks. But I am like, this is my window. I have to make something in this window.
Yeah.
Or it's a miss. Like I can't miss anymore because I have such limited time to do this. So this, all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this thing moving in this crazy erratic pattern. And I look over and it's this bright orangish red small bird that I've never seen in this position before. It's not that rare, turns out, but I was like, oh, I've never seen that here. It's called a vermilion flycatcher. And so I'm stuck down behind this huge set of reeds that are thick, like small tree limbs in front of me. Then there's the bird the tree that the bird is perched in, and flycatchers will land on a branch and then they fly like 20 yards out in this incredibly erratic pattern. And they snatch like a gnat off the surface of the water and they fly back to the perch. And the wind's blowing so hard that the whole tree that the bird is in is moving like this. And I'm seeing this thing and I'm thinking, there is no way I can make a picture here. There's no way. And I've got this Nikon Z8 with a 180 to 600 with bird tracking. And I made 3 frames. First of all, I got just a straight image of the bird on the branch, right? Solid. So I'd try to identify what it was. I got 4 images of this thing in flight that are mind-blowing, shot through the tree branches. So the autofocus knows, oh, it's not the tree branch you're after. It's not the foreground branches. It's not the midground branches. Oh, you're after this little frenetic thing that's moving around. And I think a lot of people that are non-kind of birders, non-photography people would look at it and say, oh, that's nothing. It's a picture of a bird. It's mind-blowing that this thing worked. I could not believe it. And I was like, I feel, like I just climbed Mount Everest getting this stupid picture. And that's, this equipment is just light years beyond anything I thought I would ever have my hands on.
Yeah, it's so cool. I got some frames. I went to the MotoGP last year and managed to get some of the bikes with a 90mm manual on my M. And I felt like I'd won, and they're terrible, to be clear, but they mean something to me. Like I was there, there's probably compositionally, but it's like the fact that I got, 2-time world champion Pecco Bagnaia coming down a straight, and I cheated. I was at the end of the straight, so he had to slow down eventually. So, using all the things, but get a few.
You did it.
Yeah, you get a couple of frames and you're like, yeah, there we go. And I did it with something small that I could carry because there was a guy there in his 60s with his Pelly case of Nikon gear and massive lenses. And I was just like, mate, and it was baking hot in Holland. And this poor guy is schlepping around the entire track to get his shots. And I think that's the danger, is that if it's not your job, sometimes it's not your job, and that's okay. Just go and enjoy it, it's going to be okay.
I told my nephew that. I said, if you are interested in birding, don't photograph. Just get a good pair of binoculars and go out and enjoy it. And I said, you can get on a plane with a pair of binoculars and not think twice. The 180 to 600 is not crazy big, but it's crazy long, and I have a waterproof backpack where the camera and the lens fit in perfectly and it's secured and I can take it with me. And again, if I hadn't been a photographer, I don't know if I'd probably just have binoculars, but it's a burden at times. This stuff gets so addictive and gets in your blood where, I can't think, I can't, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not thinking images and books. Like the first thought when I nailed that picture of the flycatcher was, oh, that's a spread. And because of the way the branches are, oh, this is perfect. I can run like copy here and there could be that. And I'm just like in the field as I'm still standing there holding, I'm designing a spread in my head. At times you just don't want to do that. It takes over your entire life. I mean, there's worse things that could take over your entire life, but at the same time, I totally get it. People always say, "Oh, I wish I could go with you on your trips," and I'm like, "No, you'd hate it. You would absolutely hate it."
Running around after Don Quixote, he's like chasing windmills. Day 3 of chasing windmills is quite tiring, as it turns out.
It's funny because the crowd that's even crazier than the photographers are birders. I mean, I'm new to birding. I'm not really a birder. I don't know enough to really call myself a birder. I'm interested. I always joke that I'm paying attention for the first time. But I mean, I was with a guy when I went to Antarctica a few months ago. We were crossing the Drake Channel and we got lucky. It wasn't super heavy seas, but the ship's pitching and there's plenty of sick people and that kind of stuff. And it's blowing like snow and wet rain at like 40 knots across, like horizontally across the fantail. And I look out and there's 2 guys out there. And I told my wife, I go, 100% birders, guaranteed. and I go out and sure enough, they're birders. And one is an educator, teaches in the Southeast. And one was the father of the ornithologist who happened to be on the boat. And the father had 7,000 plus birds on his life list. And you couldn't name a country. I'm like, Borneo. He's like, just spent 30 days there. Uganda just spent 30 days. They're just driven beyond recognition. And the cool thing is, he was not a guy. I'm not talking about driven by saying I have 7,000 birds. It's just driven by this fascination that you're looking at a dinosaur, the closest thing we have to dinosaurs, and that the diversity, and also very much like photography in the sense that photography puts you in incredible places. And yes, the images can be critically important, but at the same time, the experience of being in these places. So this guy was telling me he was on a birding trip and I think they were in Borneo and there were a small group of people. And he said that there was some other animal that's very, very rare that they stumbled across. And he's like, yeah, I put the binoculars down and I'm like, oh my God, when am I ever going to see this other thing? Like, we need to appreciate this. He said there was another guy on the trip, another birder who was like, who cares about that stupid thing? Like birds, he's like running, we have to go. So, you get those guys, but for the most part, birders have been really fun to hang out with because they're so smart. They're so intelligent and so like, you're talking about a field that is inexhaustible and they are just going forward. And here's another interesting wrinkle is that some of the most important birders in the world are women. And historically, that's been true. They've never gotten their fair shake. They've never gotten their due. But some women, and I don't remember the names off the top of my head, I've read their books and their biographies, just astounding, and never, like, always skipped over in the history, skipped over in the competitions. But it's pretty fantastic. I absolutely love it.
No, it's very cool. I really enjoyed. I was watching. I think I probably just found you on YouTube maybe about a year before you kind of transitioned into your birding phase, and it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to watch you kind of like going from the sort of tone of content changed a little bit. It was like a little bit less running and cycling and life in the desert, and a little bit more. It was funny because I came to you for the sort of I was thinking about it last night. It's like sort of tutor stroke cool friends, cool older brother energy of like, you think you're good now, you're not actually that good. Go and listen to Nirvana, this band Nirvana, or you should listen to Prince. Everyone had those people in their life who like introduce you to the cool band, and you're like, oh my God, I would never have discovered them any other way. but then it was also, there's like, it was really clear that you discovered something that was suddenly speaking to you in a new way, and how nice that was. It's that kind of parasocial thing of like, it's nice that this person I see doing things is enjoying something new, and I can see that it's new to them because they're excited about gear in a way that they haven't been for a while, or getting out and using it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that I know that even talking about birding turns off a ton of people, right? They're just not interested, whatever. And so it's fascinating to me to sort of, it's something I find interesting now, adding it into the conversations that I'm doing, but it's not the focal point. And so 99% of what I do with the birding photography, I don't talk about it, I don't post, I don't feature it, because I'm working on a book that is, to me, the masterclass of everything I've ever learned in photography. And that's what I'm working on now. So the chapter heads in the book, there'll be 33 chapters in the book. Mm-hmm. Each chapter head is an individual distinctive bird species from a very specific location. But then the geography of where that bird is, the rest of the chapter is about people, culture, history, social structure, ritual. It's all the documentary, short lens, black and white, close up people stuff. And then you get to the next chapter and it's like, okay, here's the geographic location. Here's the bird that identifies. And what I find interesting about that, one, it's incredibly challenging to do those divergent kinds of photography at the same time. And also researching what's happening in these places and then trying to get there at the right time, getting access, meeting people, and saying, like, last week I was at a restaurant, met this, a rancher from southeastern rural New Mexico and his family. We were at this outdoor restaurant. We there were not enough tables. And he said, oh, you guys are welcome to sit with my family. And we talked for a while. It's like meeting people like that and saying, hey, I know this sounds crazy. I'm a photographer from the northern part of the state. I'm doing this project. Can I come and spend time with your family? And you're just like a stranger, they're meeting at a cafe. And 99% of the time they're like, yeah, sure. Here's my phone number. And then it's setting that up, explaining what you're doing and saying, look, I'm not an Instagrammer. This is not like a 5-minute thing. Right. I'm trying to really understand what your culture is in this particular place. And what's fun about the bird angle is that the bird angle tends to diffuse the situation, because people are like, oh, that's interesting. I see those birds all the time, or I saw those and didn't know what they are. And that's interesting that you're using that bird to represent our area. Maybe you should look at this other bird that we see all the time. And then all of a sudden, the fact that you're sort of already in through the bird angle makes it easier for people to say, oh, this is like some weird guy who's got this weird project. But to encompass all those things, I was thinking about it the other day. If I wasn't working for Blurb, it would probably still take me minimum. If I was doing this full time and I had like somebody helping me with the research, it would probably take 3 years to do this project. And seeing as I don't do this full time and I don't have a researcher, it's going to take forever. But, last week I have the bird I need for the location now. I kind of have a contact that's in the agricultural community. So it's like, all right, I can slowly make my way through this.
Yeah. It speaks to the thing you've said repeatedly about how printing and making books and researching and stuff is so much more of the process, because I don't think until you started talking about it, again, it's like, I only just started paying attention. Right. Like I only just, it's when watching videos of people like you, and when you go and actually seek out photography books and look at just how much work it must go in, you realize that the quick fix photo Lightroom tweak post to a website, forget about it, that flow is so small a part of the actual process of what we've done as a people with photography for so long. Yeah. And that we're going down, it makes it so obvious, I guess, that we're going down this junk food route, right? And we're not talking about how good this could be,
Yeah. I mean, empty calories, fast food. Again, it preys on your chemistry. It preys on dopamine. That's why people post and, you post and forget, and guess what? So does the audience. It's a dopamine hit for 2 seconds and it moves on. I have no interest in it. I'll give you another example. I was at last year, May. I'm going to miss it this year, and it's killing me because it looks like it's going to be good. I was at this thing called the Biggest Week in American Birding, and the Swarovski was there, which is an optics maker out of Austria, and they're arguably the best binoculars in the world. And they had this really cool sort of trailer they pull behind a 4x4, and the sides of the trailer lift up, and it's their display. And my wife knew the Swarovski rep, and I'm just looking at this thing. He, in this trailer, has a magazine that's produced by Swarovski. I think it's called Closer. And I picked up it's beautiful. It is a gorgeous publication, and the design is gorgeous, and the images are gorgeous. And I was like, oh my God, why on earth would I ever go to Swarovski's Instagram feed when I have access to this? I mean, I had them in my van. I used to drive around and carry those in the van. And I have three issues. I've looked through them 100 times. Yeah. And I'm in Texas right now. Before I drove here, I had them in my hands, and I was like, my wife said, you don't need to take those to Texas. And I was like, maybe I should just take one, because, you open that thing up and you're like, this is the effort of world-class photographer, world-class designer, somebody who's very skilled in choosing materials in terms of what material you're going to print on. The cover is this like textured, amazing cover. I was like, this is a full team of high-level professionals designing something that is absolutely impactful. And I think once you're down that path, the rest of this stuff just fades in. I mean, I can't fathom right now. And again, all my friends, my family, everybody is not in the same camp as me. Yeah. I cannot imagine going to Instagram now for any reason. And frankly, I feel the same about YouTube. I mean, I still post when I'm in the field. I will post things to YouTube, my community page, where it's just a still image and a link saying, hey, I just discovered this. I posted something in there today. I can't remember what it was. It might have been about my friend Brant's book on Israel. I don't remember. But it's like, hey, this is interesting. I thought I'll do it here. But to make a film and put it on YouTube again, it's such a bizarre transformation that once I made that decision, like, oh, this is not good, I don't want to be around this, boom, cut it off. It's like it doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. And but again, I don't know. I think I'm just wired differently. Not better by any stretch. Just different.
Yeah, no, I do. I think there is something increasingly icky feeling about some of this stuff. Like I was complaining to some friends of mine recently about the way that these big companies like Apple mediate a lot. Like a lot of my gear is Apple. It has been for 20 years, right? 22, in fact. And I rely on it, and it works well together, and I love using it, and it's great. And, I still use my iPod every day. It's literally on my desk in front of me. All that stuff is great. But the way that they're behaving with the kind of the antitrust stuff, and the way that like the App Store cut of 30% when challenged, and then they go, okay, no, Netflix, you can tell your customers to buy it on your website, and we won't take 30%. We'll take 27. And it's this malicious compliance that from people with trillions of dollars. And you just think, what? I know. I mean, I will never be in a position where I have to say goodbye to billions of dollars as a revenue stream. I do understand that. And that would be the end of Tim Cook's job. And he would have to retire at that point. Multi-millionaire Tim Cook would have to retire. What a shame. But it is like, we surely we're doing it wrong. If the result of even one of the like good guys, because like Google, like, and Facebook, they were, Mark Zuckerberg was a bit of a monster right from the start. I think we knew what he was. Yeah. Werner Herzog would say he looked into the void looked back at him and ran away, kind of like, some people showed us what they were very early on. Yeah. And some are now changing, and they're using their own kind of zealotry or dogmatism about their right to kind of defend their decisions. When Spotify complains about them taking all their money, and Apple go, well, we built the iPhone and Spotify want to profit off it. And you're just like, hang on. Like, I feel like it's Alien versus Predator. Whoever wins, we will lose. And we'll just be sat left in the dust of this thing, like, of what could have been somehow. It's not working.
There's so much money involved. I think, greed and corruption drive such a huge part of our culture and society, drives our government for sure. And I think, you say that and people are like, oh, you're anti-American. I think to me, that's the most American thing you could do, is point out the fact, point to the corruption and say, we need to like fix this. But, Apple gets a pass unlike any other company I've ever seen. I have an iPhone 15. I felt that the 13 was a great phone. The 14 felt like a step back, and the 15, the battery won't hold a charge. Right. So I have the 5G turned off. I have the Find My Phone turned off. I have all these things turned off. I'm now carrying a battery pack for the first time in years because I can't get through the day without recharging the battery multiple times.
Yeah.
And when I say that to a friend who stops by, he's like, "Oh, it just must be you." And I'm like, Google iPhone 15 battery problems.
Yeah,
it's millions of people who have this problem. And Apple gets a pass because they're cool and their stuff's cool.
Yep.
I was thinking about it the other day. I asked my wife, I said, okay, when it comes to Instagram, we know with 100% certainty, in 2017, they promoted genocide because of the ad revenue. So those reports are out. They're out there for anybody to read. They knew what they were doing. The Rohingya, disaster in Southeast Asia. Amnesty International said, look, this is clear evidence. They knew what they were doing. They promoted it, and they made money because of the ad revenue they knew was going to be astounding. So they did it. We also know they targeted preteen girls because their self-harm rates tripled in 2013. And once they figured that out, they were like, we'll just feed them a constant supply of things that are going to keep them at unrest. When is enough enough? Yeah. And I said to my wife, if we knew that they were killing preteen girls, I would say 95% of my friends would still stay on it. They would find a reason to say, oh, that's not me. I'm not killing them. But I just use this for work. That's when someone has a real problem when they say, oh, I just use Instagram for work. I just use it for work.
Yeah.
I think all of these platforms, Facebook, you mentioned, just pick a year out of the last 10 years and type in that year and type Facebook scandal. And it's just one egregious thing after another. And yet how many of my friends said, okay, enough is enough? None. They're all still glued to it.
Yeah. My favorite thing about Facebook is that Nick Clegg, our former deputy prime minister, is now their chief apologist. And he's landed a plum post being in government job. And it's hilarious to me that when Nick turns up on things, but when he was in a coalition government with the Tories, he obviously got good at apologizing for things he didn't necessarily agree with, and it just sat with him. He's like, hey, I can retire on this, so why not?
They get a massive salary. They roll the dice and say, I can get, no matter what happens, I'm going to walk away with a golden parachute. I mean, when you saw Zuckerberg testifying in front of Congress and you saw that little smirk on his face and you realize that, first of all, our Congress is too old. They don't even understand what Facebook is. They don't know the technology, and he knows that. So he's just sitting there making stuff up, or, and Sheryl Sandberg did the same thing. Did you do this? No. Well, here's evidence you did. Okay, well, maybe I did. Did you sign this?
They're learning from it. We're apologizing and we're learning from it. Was the thing for a long time.
And then there's no penalty whatsoever. And they just keep going out there. I mean, I think I look around at some of these folks and they have so many classic sociopathic characteristics, and not psychopathic, sociopathic, which is the inability to feel empathy. And I look at a lot of these people and there's just classic examples of like nothing else matters but revenue and the shareholders. Like, how do I appease the shareholders and do that? And it's a weird kind of bind that we've gotten ourselves into because they're so interlaced with our culture and daily life that it's just they've just creeped into everything if you're still in those platforms. And the funny part for me is like the people that say, oh man, like, how are you going to do your job if you're not on these platforms? And I'm like, are you really at the point where you think you have to have these to do your jobs? I mean, I'd go to photo festivals 10, 12 years ago, and they always had industry panels, which I find fascinating. And they get these like editors, agents, art buyers, publishers up on these panels. And like 12 years ago, roughly, you'd start to hear, oh, well, everybody in here needs an Instagram account. Everybody in here, you got to be on Instagram. And I'm like, oh, I know what that means. All caps, 4 letters, LAZY. You are the biggest bunch of lazy losers I have ever seen, because you want everybody on Instagram so you can just easily find them and you don't have to go to websites. That's what that whole thing was. That's how it started. It's not necessarily about that now, but that's how it started. And nobody had the nerve to get up in those things and say, you guys are lazy. You're telling the most creative people around to all do the same thing. And nobody finds that interesting or odd. Nobody questions it. Because again, goes back to what we were talking about initially. That is OWT. That is old world thinking. That is these people sitting up on stage saying, I'm the one that's in power, even though my kingdom is crumbling. I'm still in power, and I'm going to get all of you lemmings to do what I want you to do. And what they should have done is stood up and said, you know what? We need another panel. We need some forward thinking people here, because now it's not so much about laziness. It's about metrics.
Yes.
You know, and this is a really tough pill for photographers to swallow. There's very little conversation about photography now. It's about metrics.
Yeah.
And Instagram is simply about metrics. Does this person have the metrics that are going to fit our metrics, what we're looking for? It really doesn't matter what your work is. It doesn't matter who you are. We're going to go through who your followers are, make sure there's no super offensive people. These numbers add up. Great. It is the most soulless, awful, system I've ever seen. I try not to ever be involved, to try to ever be around it. I just do not believe in it. And what's interesting, and finally I'm starting to see some light. I had a conversation with a very high level business person a couple of days ago who said to me, why anybody would still be on Instagram is a mystery. It's been dead for over a year. There's no ROI. The influencer thing is over. Move on, and I was like, oh, yeah, finally. I was saying this 10 years ago, but 5 years ago for sure, saying like, look, why are we still doing this? Like, these influencers are, talk about sociopathic. They'll take your money, and 5 minutes after your platform's over, they'll go straight to your competitor and do, they'll do anything for anyone for any price. And I was just like, this, and they don't make books. So like, why would we, ever work with
why would you be there? Yeah. It's funny, on Monday, as a kind of reaction, I posted a thing. I had a realization last week. I'm going to post a spoof for April Fool's Day. I posted a fake preset pack that just turns your images yellow, like the logo for the podcast.
No way. That's hilarious.
Just like, and I put a quote like front and center on the webpage that said, I've spent minutes crafting this and can't wait to see what my listeners do with it. And it was just because it's just so much of the time. It's just like preset. And I just, I don't know if
sell. Speaking of sell. I don't sell these personally, but getting back to the lens, and I'm bringing this up because somebody wrote me this bizarre email about, it's such and I'm sure you've experienced this before. The post that I did a couple of days ago about how I got to Nikon in the first place, going back to like 1988. The risk with doing a post like that is that it turns into a geek fest, and people will write and list every camera they've ever had and why they used it. They'll like ignore the entire post. And it's just like, oh, here's a chance to talk about camera gear. And and it's, I have to write disclaimers. Please don't do that. That's not what this post is about, kind of thing. And somebody wrote me this bizarre thing about the 40 millimeter, which is now what I'm using with the Nikon ZF. And when I bought the Nikon because of nostalgia, it looked like an FM2, and I was like, oh, this is kind of funny. And I loved that camera, and it'll be fun. And then it was cheap for a digital camera. It was inexpensive. And then I got it, and I was like, damn, this thing is really good. And then I was like, oh, they made these two like retro lenses, a 28 and a 40, that look like the old manual focus lenses. I was like, I'll just get the 40.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It is. I mean, that combination of a full frame camera that shoots a beautiful black and white file, and that 40 mil. So if anybody out there is like, oh, these lenses aren't, you have to get the 35 or the 50 or whatever, I don't think you know what's going on with these lenses, because that thing is sharp and it's fast. And I have been like, it's the perfect thing for me, because it's like hedging your bets.
Yes.
You would be tempted. I'll get a 35 and a 50, but the 40 kind of covers both bases.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, this is ideal. I have a month in Europe coming up for Blurb. And cool. I'm teaching a week-long book workshop in Menorca. And then I'm doing events in London, Barcelona, Eindhoven, Amsterdam. And then I fly straight back, and I go to Seattle and Victoria and do more. And I'm taking a ZF and a 40. Like, that's the only thing I'm taking. I'm taking some mics so that I can do some recording, but That's it. The thing is like the Z is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And it's built like a battleship, but it's, it fits in this little shoulder bag. This is all I'm taking.
Yeah.
For a month doing blurb work.
Yeah. That is so cool. I love that. I mean, if I can only have one, it's a 35, and then I'll like let the chips fall, right? Because you can make interesting portraits with that focal length just as much, And I agree with you when you were saying the 50 f2, the Summicron F50 is there's magic in that one. For me, that's my color one. They're the two that are in my bag. The color, the 50 for the color and for like people. And then the Zeiss when I'm feeling like I want some black and white and I want some texture and I want a bit of, the weird antique blurring at the edges that the Zeiss has, because that design is like 60 years old at this point. It's really fun.
I have a Zeiss 51. I think it's a 1.450 Zeiss for my Nikon mount that I have for my F3 and my FM2T. And yeah, it's gorgeous. I mean, there's a little fall off on the edges, but that lens shot wide open. It is so sharp. It's manual focus, not auto, but it's a blast to use that. And I mean, and the FM2T is like smaller than my hand. It just is this itty bitty box that is such a basic thing. But again, for me, when I pick it up, it's more about memory. It's about, it reminds me of what photography felt like and what it meant for me 88, 89, 90, 91, where I was like, the first time I went to the border and shot on the border. And I was like, oh man, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. I was thinking about a project the other day. I was in school and I had an old Land Cruiser and a police scanner. And I'd go out at like midnight and I'd park and I'd turn that scanner on and I would just wait. And East Austin now is Yuppieville, but Hipsterville. But back then it was a really dodgy gang and kind of lots of gangs. And I would turn that scanner on and it was just like mayhem. And one night I met a guy. He's an African-American dude that had this massive cross. It was like 9 feet tall and he was dragging it through the streets and handing out religious paperwork. Just the nicest guy in the world. And I was like, dude, you're a risk taker, man. There's like gunfire and there's a ton of gang stuff going on. And he's like dragging this huge cross. And he was kind of like off limits to the gang guys. Like nobody was like trying to hurt him because they knew. And he was living in this old abandoned house that he turned into a makeshift church. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So I start going over there. And again, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like, hey, dude, I'm a photo student and this is really interesting. And it's very unlike my world. And I'd kind of like to know a little bit more about your world. And I can't just like waltz over here at night. I kind of need a reason to be over here or I'm going to get smoked or the cops are going to be like, what are you doing? So he was the nicest guy in the world. And he was like, you could really help me. Because, I don't have any money and come look at this house we're living in. He only had like six parishioners, he only had 6 followers. And I just went over there and spent as much time day and night, like over there. And I met all the people that were coming in and out of there and including a guy who didn't quite fit the mold of what I thought I would encounter there. And this guy came up to me immediately and said, do not take photographs of me. Like never, ever take pictures of me. And I was like, no problem. And then I kept going back and kept going back. And again, am I thinking about my equipment at this point? No, I'm thinking, how do I get in and out of here without getting smoked? Where do I park where my car's not going to get broken into? These people are in a tight situation. How do I pay respect to that? And also, how do I learn enough about them to know I'm not trying to exploit them. I'm trying to figure out how this happened. Like, how did these people get here? And the guy who said, don't photograph me, a couple, like 2 weeks into this said, okay, I need you to photograph me. And I was like, what? And I remember where we were. We were in the center room of the house that had been converted into the like church room. It had the pews but they weren't bolted to the floor. They were just loose. So it was like rows of official church pews, but like not bolted down. So like you'd sit on them and they'd move all over the place. And then the outside of the room was piled with just random stuff. And there was like a little pulpit and a Jesus thing on the wall. And he was sitting in the back row, and his head was down like this on the top of the pew. And he said, you need to photograph me. And I was like, okay. And I made this image of him. You can't see his face, but his head's down and he's on the pew. And then it's this row of like pews and the beautiful light coming through the windows. And there's like a religious thing on the wall. And he's like, I was a successful architect. I was a really successful architect. And he goes, I went to a party and somebody gave me crack. And I smoked crack one time and I lost everything, wife, family, kids, job, house, car, everything. And, he starts talking, and his vocabulary and his context. And I was like, this doesn't fit the sort of media's, crack. At this time, we were coming out of the crack era, the freeway, Ricky Ross, LA, Iran-Contras, bringing cocaine to the US, dumping it in Los Angeles, that whole thing. We'd come out of that, and it was cruising into the 90s, but he was like, he was a victim of the end of that. And I was like, man, this is a complicated story. This is a very delicate story. Like, what do I do with this? How do I present this? And this again was like 1989 or 90. I think if I tried to do that story today, I would get a lot of flack from people who would say, oh, you can't do a project in the African-American community. Oh, you can't do that. And I always say, that's not true. I did it because I was interested, and I met these people, and I was like, this is a scenario I've never been in my life. I don't know what this is like. How did these people get here? Who are they? What options do they have? Why is this happening 6 blocks away from a massively wealthy institution in the University of Texas? You're within 3 baseball throws of the campus, and you have this going on. Like, how does this make sense? And through that project, I met the anti-gang unit of the police force, which I did a subsequent project with them, rode around with them for weeks and weeks. Through the gang project, I met a kid in the 4th Street Brothers gang in Austin. And I spent months with him doing a project on him, trying to get out of the gang world by turning pro as a boxer. So it just led from one project to one project, one project. And again, I was not really thinking about my equipment. I was so impacted by what was happening in front of me. I was just trying not to screw it up, you know, and paying for a roll of transparency film at that time, to buy a roll of film and process it at this horrible lab that we called back in the scratch, because it always came back scratched. I remember having like conversations with myself, like, oh, I can shoot a roll of transparency and get it processed, or I can go to Uncle Han's kitchen and get egg rolls. Yeah. Am I hungry, or do I really want to process this film? And just being like sucked into these scenarios and knowing this is not a normal job. Like, people, this is not something that normal people do. They would, first of all, they wouldn't go to that part of town unless they had to, or, and were living there. And then to like just walk into strangers' lives one after the other and say, man, I'm really curious about, what your life is like, what's going on here. And, last week when I was sitting with that rancher at the table, I was like, I'm kind of doing the same thing now. All these years later, it's the same thing. Like, hey, I'm a stranger. Can I come stay with your family?
Yeah, that's awesome. And the circularness brings us nicely back around. It's probably a good point to stop, because you've been so generous with your time. And I think what I've loved about this conversation is that it's been the full Dan. Like, it's been exactly what I hoped it would be. I kind of thought you might reject the premise, which is why I initially, like, when I reached out, I was like, I talked to Julian, and you were on my list of people to kind of reach out to and see what would happen. Yeah. And he was like, he's a pro. So we finished, because he does a load of radio and podcasty stuff. So we finished, we say bye-bye. And then he knows that when you say bye-bye, it's not really saying bye-bye. And he stayed on and we chatted for a bit afterwards. And he was like, do 20. And he's like, and you should reach out to Dan. And I said, but it's gear. And it's like, and I know that you it's not about the gear for you. It's often been about survival. So this has been exactly what I kind of hoped it would be as a conversation. I hope that it's also inspiring to a bunch of people who, because I don't think enough people talk about that part of the job. That that what you're talking about there, finding stories, reporting them responsibly and ethically and thoroughly over a period of time.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why I found this intriguing was I don't really have that much to add in terms of like the differences between these different lenses from brand to brand or what focal lengths.
Yeah.
But it was it made me think for a minute, okay, if I'm going to do this podcast and we're talking about prime lenses, like what am I going to be able to add? And what I realized was how much of my career was initially fear-based. And then when I lived in Los Angeles and I was doing more editorial stuff, it wasn't so much fear, but it was, I just need to keep the machine going so that I can make a living and pay my rent. And again, like once you had your kit, then it was just you didn't think about it. It was all just like, how do I get jobs and how do I get assignments and how do I get paid and all that stuff. And I think as a consumer and prosumer, it's easy to like spend all your time focused on this kit. But once you've seen the greener pastures of projects and books and stories, and you've been experiencing other people's lives, all the rest of it just kind of fades away. I've jokingly told people a million times, my van is not the thing. The van's the thing that gets you to the thing. And that's kind of what cameras are. Cameras are what get you to the thing. And you better have a thing. Otherwise you're going to be, navel gazing at your device. Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's going to be fun with other geeky people, but like, it's not a way to add to the conversation.
No, completely. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing rest of day. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've loved it.
Yeah, this is great. I'm glad I met you. And again, I mean, in terms of style, I'm giving you a 10 because
thank you.
You could have planted those books in the background for all I know. You could have planted the artwork. The artwork kind of matches your jacket, and I love your jacket and your glasses. And you're a stylish dude, man. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, I'll be in the UK in May. From May 10th until the 17th, I'll be in London. And then I go to teach a book workshop in Menorca. Then I'm in Barcelona for 2 days. We're doing photo walks, meetups. I'm going to do like informal portfolio and book reviews in my hotel lobby if anybody's interested. Amazing. And then 3 days in Eindhoven. And then I'm going to Amsterdam to do the same thing. Photo walk, meetup, reviews. And then I'm teaching in Japan in September.
Cool. Well, busy year for you.
It is. Good. It's going to be another busy one. It goes so fast. It's scary.
Yeah.
So fast.
It's April already. All right. Well, have an amazing rest of the day. Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate this. It was great.
You too. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. You can rate and review this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and that'll help people to find the show. You can also sign up for a midweek newsletter that I've started doing. You can get that at ianfarrell.com/sign-up, and there is a link to it in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.